What would you do if someone humiliated the person who's had your back for a decade, right in front of a crowd? Jason Statham didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. But what he did next left an entire bank frozen in silence. Stay with us until the very end, because the way this story unfolds will challenge everything you think you know about power, respect, and quiet justice. The sun hadn't yet broken through the smog hanging low over Los Angeles when Carlos Alvarez stepped out of his small apartment. His black slacks were neatly pressed, and the white shirt he wore had been ironed the night before with the same care he gave to everything in life. At 50, Carlos had long since accepted that the world rarely noticed quiet men. But today, the weight in his pocket wasn't invisible. It was everything he had. $32,000 in cash, bills saved over 4 long years tucked tightly in a plain brown envelope. Every dollar in that envelope had a story, a missed birthday party, an overnight shift accepted last minute, an evening where Carlos had driven Jason Statham across 3 cities without a break. It was money earned through sweat, silence, and sacrifice. Not for himself, but for the woman who once held his hand at the border, whispered dreams into his ear in broken English, and now struggled to walk without pain. Her condition had worsened. The surgery they could never afford was now possible. Barely. The bank was 5 blocks from their home. Carlos didn't own a car of his own, just the black SUV he drove for Jason. He arrived early, stood in line quietly, and rehearsed his words in his head. He didn't do this often. He paid bills digitally, avoided large crowds, trusted machines more than faces, but today he needed to withdraw everything in person. He needed to feel the weight of that money in his hands just once before it became hospital forms and hope. The bank lobby was cold, not just in temperature, but in tone. The kind of place where laughter felt inappropriate and small talk evaporated under fluorescent lights. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air, as if time had forgotten to move here. Carlos took a number and waited, gripping the envelope like a lifeline. When his turn came, he approached the counter with a soft nod, shoulders slightly hunched in practiced humility. The teller was young, sharp in appearance but dull in spirit. Slick hair, clean suit, and a gaze that skimmed over Carlos without registering humanity. The moment he saw the envelope, everything shifted. There was a pause, a quiet judgment that only lasted a second, but carried the weight of a lifetime. The teller opened it, rifled through the bills with a raised brow, and began typing slowly. Too slowly. His fingers moved with suspicion, not service. Carlos offered his ID, his voice measured, steady, respectful. He explained that the money had been saved over years of driving, for his wife, for her surgery. But the teller wasn't listening. He was watching a man who didn't fit the profile, a man with calloused hands, with an accent, with shoes too clean for his clothes. He began asking questions, not about the account, but about the man. Why so much cash? Do you have proof? Where did it come from? Carlos explained again, but this time his voice faltered. The line behind him grew. An older woman frowned in confusion. 2 teenagers laughed under their breath. The teller leaned forward, and though his words were professional, his eyes were not. They judged, they doubted, they dismissed. The final blow wasn't loud. It came quietly, with a shrug and a refusal. The transaction was denied. Without verification, no withdrawal could be approved. No receipts, no release. Carlos stood still for a second too long, then took his envelope back, his hands slightly trembling. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He had been through enough in life to know when dignity mattered more than defense. He walked out slowly, as if the doors behind him had closed on something more than just a transaction. Outside, the sunlight was warm, but it didn't reach him. His chest felt hollow, his feet heavy. Leaning against the black SUV, Carlos inhaled deeply and closed his eyes for a moment. He wiped them before they could betray him. The world had told him again what he already knew. Men like him were not meant to be seen, but there was no time to dwell. His job awaited. Jason's schedule was precise. Carlos got into the car, adjusted the seat, checked the mirrors, and began his familiar routine with robotic grace. But something had changed. His hands gripped the wheel tighter. His eyes lost their quiet confidence. There was a heaviness in the silence that followed him now, as if the humiliation had followed him into the vehicle buckled in beside him. He tried to gather himself. He had a job to do. Jason didn't know, couldn't know. This wasn't something he planned to share. This was just another moment to swallow, another bruise the world wouldn't see. And yet, in the rearview mirror, something else stirred. An approaching figure in black. The man who'd unknowingly entrusted this quiet driver with more than a car. Jason Statham opened the door and stepped into the vehicle with the same quiet energy he always carried. Sunglasses on, voice casual. But Carlos couldn't respond the same way he always did. His tone was off, his rhythm broken. And in the silence that followed, the engine wasn't the only thing running. Because what Carlos didn't know, what the teller couldn't have predicted, was that Jason Statham noticed everything. The small tremble in a voice, the shift in posture, the silence that said more than words. And today, the silence was deafening. Jason leaned back in his seat, but he didn't close his eyes like usual. His jaw tightened. And though Carlos kept his eyes on the road, the man behind him had already decided this ride would not end where it was supposed to. The streets of Los Angeles blurred past the windows, but inside the SUV, time moved differently. Thick, slow, heavy. Carlos kept his eyes fixed on the road, his grip on the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles pale. His breathing was steady, too steady, as if he were holding something in. Behind him, Jason remained unusually quiet but not absent. He wasn't scrolling through his phone or replying to texts. He was watching, listening, feeling the silence. Carlos had driven Jason for nearly a decade. He knew his moods, his habits, the way he liked his coffee, the way he preferred silence in the mornings and soft music in the late afternoons. But Jason also knew him. Not in the way of conversation, but through the 1,000 small patterns of a man who never asked for anything and always showed up. And something about today felt wrong. Jason took off his sunglasses and rested them in his lap. The leather seat creaked slightly as he leaned forward, not with urgency but with quiet intent. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Carlos's face. The redness around his eyes hadn't faded. His posture had changed. The unshakable calm that defined him had cracked just enough to be seen. There were no direct questions at first, just a soft, concerned tone, a pause, a gentle probe. Carlos answered with as little detail as possible. He said it was nothing. Just a bad morning. Just fatigue. Jason didn't push. He didn't need to. The air had already confessed for him. They reached a red light. Jason took the opportunity to lean in just slightly more, his voice low but firm. Carlos hesitated, then gave in, not with emotion, but with precision. Like a man handing over evidence in court. He told him what had happened. The visit to the bank, the envelope of cash, the teller, the questions, the refusal, the faces in line, the shame. Jason didn't interrupt. He didn't blink. He absorbed every word. When Carlos finished, he didn't speak right away. He looked out the window for a few seconds, his jaw set, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee. 3 slow taps, then stillness. Then came a memory. Jason shared quietly a moment from his own childhood, a memory of his mother overworked and overlooked, of people treating them like they didn't belong, of standing in line behind glass counters with empty wallets and hopeful eyes, only to be met with suspicion. He said it calmly, without dramatics. But Carlos could hear the echo behind the words, the same ache, the same burn. When they reached the location of the scheduled meeting, Jason didn't ask Carlos to park. Instead, he spoke with clarity. "We're making a stop first." Carlos blinked, unsure he heard correctly. He checked the clock. The meeting was in 20 minutes. There was no stop on the schedule. He looked back through the mirror. Jason nodded once. The bank. Carlos's heart skipped. For a second, he wanted to protest. But something in Jason's expression silenced the thought before it could form. This wasn't an errand. It was something else. Something deeper. Something that didn't fit into a calendar. The SUV turned around, moving through traffic with the same smooth control Carlos always maintained. But inside the vehicle, everything felt different. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't avoidance anymore, it was concentration, purpose. And underneath it all, something Carlos hadn't felt in hours, the quiet flicker of being seen. As they neared the bank, Jason leaned forward once more, this time to share something more personal. He spoke about loyalty, about the way some people show up for you without ever asking for credit. He spoke about how Carlos had once driven him to a hospital in the middle of the night after a family emergency, how he had waited in the car for hours without sleeping or asking questions. Jason hadn't forgotten. "You saved my life once," he said. "You just didn't know it." Carlos didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat was tight and his hands gripped the wheel with silent restraint. He pulled into the bank's parking lot with a precision that didn't match the storm inside him. He turned off the engine and exhaled, long and slow. Jason opened the door before the silence could collapse in on them. He stepped out, adjusting his jacket with deliberate calm. Carlos watched him for a moment in the mirror, frozen, unsure whether to follow. But Jason didn't look back. He didn't have to. He was already walking through the glass doors. Carlos remained in the car, hands trembling on the wheel, staring at the doors that had once denied him his dignity. But now, Jason Statham had entered, and the weight of those doors was about to shift forever. The doors of the bank opened with a soft swoosh, but the ripple it sent through the lobby was immediate. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Phones were subtly lifted. No one expected to see Jason Statham walking into their local branch on a quiet Tuesday morning. He didn't arrive with an entourage, no bodyguards, no publicist, just black boots on a dull linoleum floor and the unmistakable presence of a man who didn't need volume to command a room. He moved with quiet intent, eyes scanning the lobby until they landed on the reception desk. Calmly, he approached. The receptionist blinked twice, frozen, and managed a quiet "good morning" that barely escaped her lips. "I'd like to be helped by the same teller who handled a withdrawal yesterday morning," Jason said evenly, his voice low, composed, but unmistakable. The receptionist stammered, reaching for the keyboard, unsure how to respond. I'm not sure who—" "I'll wait," Jason replied, standing still. Words spread through the room like wildfire. Customers whispered. Employees peeked around corners. The security guard adjusted his stance, unsure whether to intervene or simply get out of the way. And then, from a side hallway, Mark appeared, clipboard in hand, sleeves perfectly rolled, confidence practiced and polished, until his eyes met Jason's. The clipboard stopped. His steps faltered. His smile cracked into something unsure and twitchy. "Mr. Statham, what an honor," he said, stretching the words into a forced grin. Jason didn't smile. He didn't nod. "I'm here to make a deposit," he said, "and to ask you a question." Mark's throat bobbed. The clipboard lowered. A hush fell over the bank. Jason stepped slightly closer. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut through the space like a quiet blade. Would you have treated a man in a suit the same way you treated the one who stood here yesterday morning? Mark blinked, said nothing. The room held its breath. Jason's eyes didn't move. Would you have questioned him if his shirt had a designer label? If his skin was lighter? If his name sounded more like yours? Mark opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. His hand tightened around the clipboard until his knuckles turned white. The eyes of customers, tellers, and even the branch manager, who had now emerged from a back office, turned to him. Some had begun filming. Others simply stood, rooted in place. Jason continued, "You asked for receipts from a man who's worked 2 jobs for 15 years without ever asking for help. You looked at him and saw a threat, not a person." The branch manager took a cautious step forward. "Mr. Statham, perhaps we could speak in private." Jason didn't take his eyes off Mark. "No. I asked to be helped by this man, and I'd like to finish what I started right here." Silence returned, thicker now. Jason pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. The same brown envelope Carlos had carried with pride and left with shame. He placed it gently on the counter. "This is the deposit I came to make," he said. Mark looked at it, then at Jason. "But the real value here," Jason added, "isn't in the money." He turned slightly and nodded toward the entrance. Carlos stood just beyond the glass doors, watching, his hands at his sides, face unreadable. Jason raised his voice just enough to carry across the lobby. "He's my driver," he said. "But more than that, he's my friend. And what happened here yesterday, that ends today." There was no applause, no dramatic music, just stillness, the kind that follows truth when it's laid bare and raw. Mark looked down, then up, searching for something, an escape, a response, an excuse. None came. The weight of 1,000 silent judgments had reversed. The teller, once in control, was now exposed, vulnerable, human. Jason turned, picked up the envelope and walked to the glass doors. Outside, Carlos stood unmoving. Jason stopped in front of him, looked him in the eye, and placed the envelope in his hand. No words were needed, but Jason spoke anyway. "You were never invisible. Not to me." They left together. No cameras followed, no statements were made. But the next day, something shifted. A letter arrived at Carlos's apartment. No return address, just handwriting on the front. For Carlos. Inside was a single page. Neat penmanship, careful lines. "I humiliated you. I've thought about it every day since. My father was a chauffeur. I never told anyone that. I was ashamed. I thought being like him meant failure. But when I looked at you yesterday and saw the world looking back, I realized I had become the kind of man who would have humiliated my own father. I'm sorry. I can't take back what I did, but I needed you to know I see you now." It was signed, simply, Mark. Carlos folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box beside his daughter's graduation photo, a note from his wife, and an old coin he once carried for luck. Weeks later, the bank released a statement, not about PR or policy, but about change. They announced a new mandatory training, Empathy in Practice, created in collaboration with real clients and community members. Carlos's story was the first one featured. He didn't ask for that. He didn't want credit. But when they asked him to speak at the first training, he said only, "If it helps someone else be seen, then yes." Jason never commented publicly. He declined interviews. All he said when asked was, "It wasn't a performance, it was about dignity." And then came a Saturday afternoon, warm and ordinary, when Carlos sat at a park bench with his wife beside him. Their daughter, now a nurse, joined them with coffee and a smile. They laughed, talked about things that didn't hurt. In the distance, Jason walked by, hoodie on, hands in his pockets, quiet, alone, as always. Carlos raised a hand. Jason nodded once, then kept walking. But just before he turned the corner, he paused, turned slightly, and said just loud enough to carry, "Sometimes the quietest actions echo the loudest." Carlos smiled. This time, the world heard it. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, don't let it stop here. Subscribe for more real stories that reveal the strength behind silent actions, the dignity of everyday heroes, and the power of standing up without ever needing to shout. Because sometimes the people who speak the loudest are the ones who say nothing at all.